The boy called addled. The year was 1854. In a small town called Milan, Ohio. A curious boy named Thomas sat silently by the window, his wide eyes fixed on a cluster of ants dragging crumbs across the floor. While other children repeated their lessons like parrots, Thomas Edison was consumed by questions no one else dared to ask. Why do ants work together? Do they talk to each other? Can we listen if we try hard enough? His teacher didn't find these questions charming. At the one-room schoolhouse in Port Huron, Michigan, the 9-year-old was considered a distraction. Restless, stubborn, odd. One morning, after a series of interruptions in class, the schoolmaster called young Thomas addled, a word that clung to the boy like a stain. His mother, Nancy Edison, a former schoolteacher herself, stormed into the school that afternoon. Her voice, calm but unwavering, cut through the whispers of judgment. "My son is not broken," she said. "You simply don't know how to teach him." She withdrew him from the school that day, choosing to educate him herself at home. And so began the strange, brilliant education of Thomas Edison. Guided not by textbooks, but by wonder, Nancy filled the house with books. Biographies, science, history, Shakespeare. Whatever sparked his fire, she nurtured his hunger for learning, and in return, Thomas devoured knowledge with ferocity. Their basement became his laboratory. Glass bottles, copper wires, acids, and makeshift contraptions lined every shelf. The air reeked of sulfur and curiosity. Neighbors whispered. His siblings tiptoed past the door. But Nancy watched with quiet pride. She knew the boy who once struggled with arithmetic had found a language of his own. By age 12, Edison was restless again. He wanted to do more than read. He wanted to earn, to move, to explore. He took a job selling newspapers and candy on the Grand Trunk Railway. Between stops, he read books. Between sales, he experimented. He set up a small printing press in the baggage car and began publishing his own paper, the Grand Trunk Herald. Then, one afternoon, the scent of smoke filled the train. Thomas had knocked over a bottle of phosphorus while tinkering. Flames licked the wooden floor. The conductor stormed in, yanked him by the collar, and hurled his equipment and his dreams onto the tracks. He was slapped so hard he began to lose his hearing, a slow deafness that would follow him for the rest of his life. That night, sitting alone beside the rails with blood drying on his cheek, Thomas Edison made a silent vow. If the world didn't want to make room for him, he would carve out space with his own hands. And so began the journey of the boy once called addled, a boy whose silence would one day echo louder than 1,000 voices. The spark of curiosity. The years passed, and the boy who had once sold newspapers now walked the streets of bustling cities, Detroit, Cincinnati, Boston, with ink-stained fingers and sleepless eyes. Thomas Edison was still barely a teenager, but he moved with the urgency of someone racing time. His hearing, damaged from the train incident, left him in a muffled world. Conversations faded into hums, warnings into whispers. But in that silence, his thoughts grew louder. He listened not to voices, but to wires, engines, and the crackling hiss of electricity. By 16, he'd mastered Morse code and found work as a telegraph operator, punching signals late into the night. Cities blurred into each other as he chased job after job, invention after invention, always thinking, always tinkering. Yet his ideas found little sympathy. When he proposed a device that could automate the telegraph, employers scoffed. Investors turned him away. One company paid him for a design, then locked it away in a drawer. Another stole his blueprint and profited without credit. He slept on benches, skipped meals, and lived in borrowed corners of laboratories. His clothes were torn, but his ambition was intact. In 1868, at just 21, Edison arrived in New York City, penniless and desperate. One morning, the ticker tape machine at a brokerage firm jammed. In minutes, Edison had fixed it. No instructions, no hesitation. The firm's owner, impressed, hired him on the spot. For the first time, Edison had a lab of his own and enough money to fund his own experiments. He worked obsessively, sleeping only when exhaustion forced him to. His notebooks filled with designs, some brilliant, some broken, but all born from endless trial. It was during one of these long nights that the idea came to him. A machine that could record sound. The phonograph. Colleagues laughed at the concept. "How can you trap a voice?" they said. "Even light doesn't listen." But Edison didn't flinch. He built, failed, rebuilt. He shaped foil and needles, gears and levers, until finally, one quiet afternoon, he turned the crank and heard his own voice repeat a nursery rhyme. It was eerie, mechanical, imperfect, but it was a voice. The world was stunned. Newspapers called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. For the first time, Edison was more than a scrappy inventor. He was a sensation. He traveled, demonstrated, smiled for cameras. Yet in private, he remained as restless as ever. One success was never enough. The hunger didn't leave him. It only evolved. Late one evening, as the lab emptied and the world outside dimmed into sleep, Edison paced among scattered tools, lost in thought. He stared at a flickering gas lamp and whispered, "There has to be a better way." The world had heard his voice. Now, he would find a way to give it light. The battle for light. Menlo Park was no ordinary laboratory. To outsiders, it looked like a cluster of wooden buildings lost in New Jersey's fog. But inside, it pulsed with purpose. Thomas Edison had gathered a team of brilliant minds, chemists, machinists, thinkers, all working under his relentless vision. Their mission was clear: invent a practical, affordable electric light. A bulb that could glow longer than a few fleeting minutes. A flame without fire. It sounded simple. It wasn't. They tested bamboo, platinum, cardboard, and over 1,000 filaments. Every night, failures piled up. Glass cracked. Wires burned. Promising attempts fizzled into silence. And still, Edison pushed forward, scribbling ideas even as his fingers trembled with fatigue. "It's not that I've failed 1,000 times," he once told a reporter. "I've simply found 1,000 ways that won't work." Investors grew nervous. Newspapers mocked him. Rivals laughed, whispering that the wizard had finally met his limit. Gas companies, threatened by the idea of electric light, publicly denounced his efforts. Even some of his own men questioned the chase. But Edison didn't blink. He remembered the silence of his childhood, the ridicule, the fire on that train. This too was noise, and he had learned to ignore it. Then, after months of endless testing, a breakthrough. One of his assistants handed him a sliver of carbonized bamboo. It was nothing special, light, dark, fragile. Edison carefully fitted it into the bulb, sealed the glass, and sent current through the filament. Seconds passed, then minutes, then hours. It glowed. The lab erupted. Cheers, embraces, disbelief. For the first time, artificial light burned steadily, cleanly, safely. They recorded over 13 hours of continuous glow before the filament finally gave in. That winter, in 1879, Edison invited the public to Menlo Park for a demonstration. People traveled from miles away, stepping off trains and wagons into a street bathed in golden light. Lamps hung from trees, lit porches, and lined pathways. Gaslight had always flickered with danger. But this light, it stood still, calm, controlled, eternal. Edison walked quietly among the crowd, hands in his coat pockets, his eyes scanning every amazed face. He wasn't smiling. He was calculating. Because now came the real war. Nikola Tesla, young, brilliant, unpredictable, was working with George Westinghouse to develop alternating current AC. Edison championed direct current DC, believing it's safer. But AC was faster, more efficient, and soon more popular. Edison fought fiercely, launching campaigns to discredit AC's safety. He funded gruesome demonstrations, even the first electric chair, to prove his point. His obsession with DC turned friends into critics. His reputation, once spotless, began to darken. Still, the light bulb remained his crown. One night, as the lab settled into sleep, Edison sat alone beneath a single glowing bulb. He watched its light ripple across the floor and whispered to himself, "Now, everything changes." And he was right. The world would never be dark again. Legacy in the shadows. The years after the light bulb glowed